time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Japan's ruling coalition, made up of the Conservative Liberal Democratic Party and its junior partner Komeito, cemented their majority in the upper house after voters cast their ballots Sunday. Now, the election this year came 2 days after the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, who stepped down 2 years ago but remained very much an influential figure in Japan's political circle. According to observers, his shocking death overshadowed Sunday's elections, and polls showed that his party, the LDP, and its smaller coalition partner were likely to see a boost in the race to fill the 125 seats up for grabs. While the upper house election is more symbolic than the lower house one, a stronger win does indicate support for the sitting parties. Now, today we discuss the aftermath of Japan's elections and where the country's politics is headed with the loss of its longest-serving leader, whose legacy and influence will undoubtedly remain a fabric of Japan's modern politics. For this, we are joined by Kosuke Takahashi, Tokyo correspondent of Jane's Defense Weekly, and Jonathan Berkshire Miller, senior fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs. Very warm welcome to you both. Thank you so much for joining us. And well, my first question to you, Mr. Takahashi. Now, your country experienced a very tragic loss of your former leader 2 days before the upper house election on Friday. And well, it's still a time of just mourning for the citizens. And how is the nation processing this loss?
You know, Abe is Japan's longest serving prime minister. And it was very familiar scene of our daily life to see him on the news for quite a long time. But he suddenly died after being fatally shot. We Japanese still have some empty feeling inside. Abe was known as a very nationalistic politician. He had a very tough stance against North Korea, especially over the issue of abduction issue. He had many scandals domestically, such as the funding problem of the Cherry Blossom Party, but he was a prominent player on the global stage. In many ways, he was a notable politician, a very rare Japanese, I think. Suyong?
Right, our condolences to the Japanese people. And well, Mr. Takahashi, now the death of the former Prime Minister, it was very shocking for the nation. And observers say that it on the day of the elections, it boosted support for the ruling coalition. And well, do you think it really did affect Sunday's elections?
Yes, indeed. So-called sympathy votes surely boosted the LDP seat after the assassination of Shinzo Abe. According to TV Tokyo's opinion poll, 13% of TV viewers said they changed where to vote after the assassination of Abe, while 87% didn't change. But still 30% is still a big number, right, Suyong?
Exactly, still a huge number. And Dr. Patricia Miller, now what did you make of Sunday's elections? What were your takeaways from the results?
Well, thanks very much for having me on. And I would concur with Takashi-san's comments that this is a very shocking moment, not just for Japan, but I think the region and globally. Abe Shinzo, I think, was a leader that will be remembered, of course, in Japan, but I think more broadly throughout the Indo-Pacific region and beyond for some of his accomplishments. As it relates to the election specifically, I would agree that there definitely was a bit of a bounce as a result of his unfortunate and tragic death. That being said, the LDP only did pick up 8 seats. I mean, that is something that is significant. It's more than they had before, but it is only 8. And as far as a turnout difference, there was only a difference of 3.2%. That being said, though, as Takashi-san mentioned, that 13% that did change their mind is something significant to note.
And Mr. Takahashi, well, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, even after he stepped down from being PM, he continued to be a very powerful figure in Japanese politics. And what do you think his absence really means for factions within the Liberal Democratic Party?
Abe was a kingmaker even after he stepped down from premiership 2 years ago. He led the LDP's largest faction, consisting of the 94 lawmakers. Meanwhile, Kishida's faction is fourth largest faction, only with the 44 members. There is a high possibility that Abe faction will break up without Abe. He was a centripetal force in his faction. I think Kishida will consolidate power without any kingmaker or any behind-scene fixer from now on. So,
and well, with this sweeping win, the Prime Minister, Fumio Kishida, he's expected to have a rather smooth sailing position until the next national election scheduled for 2025. And Dr. Patricia Miller, now, would this, well, many think that this would enable the Conservative bloc to push forward their agenda for their push for more defence spending and also revisions to the country's pacifist constitution. So do you expect these kind of developments to take place now?
Well, I think there's two different angles here. I think on defense spending and the different defense legislation, that actually was, these documents were planned to come out even before this upper house election. I think that will continue. There will be gradual increases on defense spending. As it relates to the Constitution, I think there's two sides to think about. This election, I think, has solidified the supermajority now with the LDP, Komeito, and other parties that would potentially support constitutional revision. So that would bode in the right direction, I think, if you're thinking about constitutional revision. But on the second side, it is how much of a priority is this to Kishida Fumio himself? He has indicated that he does see a need to have an urgent discussion on this in the Japanese Diet. But how much of a priority, I think that is an open question.
And how do you see this, Mr. Takashi, whether or not to amend the Constitution to include the self-defense forces in the Constitution? That's emerged as a key issue for this election. So do you think it will continue to gain traction?
Yes, I think so. This election was a kind of the morning battle for LDP, and then constitutional change is Abe's strong will. So many LDP members may want to achieve the constitutional reform. And then in Japan, there will be no any national elections in coming three years. Many political experts say this is the golden 3 years for LDP. So they can maybe do whatever they want to do. So I think the hawkish LDP groups, such as Takaichi or Abe factions members, they want to push this agenda. So.
And Dr. Patricia Miller, now it seems that even on foreign policy, of course, we can't get away from Shinzo Abe's influence there. He was the first to promote the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific, which was then, of course, adopted by leaders of other countries, which, of course, evolved into greater cooperation in groupings like the Quad. Now, how did Mr. Abe shape Japan's foreign policy during his time, and how do you see Japan's foreign policy trajectory going forward?
Well, I think Abe Shinzo really was a transformational leader in many ways. I mean, I think there's the argument of how he changed Japanese politics, but I think his impact on the region, on the Indo-Pacific region, you mentioned the free and open Indo-Pacific, but beyond, frankly. One of the things that I find very interesting is looking at Abe Shinzo's travels, for example. How many countries, over 100 countries he traveled to during his tenure, which was very rare and unique for a Japanese prime minister. So for him to sort of break the mold of what a Japanese leader is supposed to do in a foreign affairs sense, I think was very significant. And I think that legacy lives on through his successors, Suga and now Kishida.
And Mr. Takahashi, now, obviously, former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, he was very international. He put he made Japan very prominent on the global stage. And how do you see new Prime Minister Kishida really taking on this role? Do you see him expanding cooperation with South Korea beyond Japan's usual Tokyo-Washington relations?
Kishida is less hawkish than Abe, and then so Kishida will take a consultatory approach toward South Korea, I'm sure. And then Kishida is not so sticking to the history issue. He never want to change the Japanese history, etc. So I think he will, how can I say, promote the multinational diplomacy from now on, for sure.
So I would like to thank our guests today, Mr. Kosuke Takahashi, Tokyo correspondent of Jane's Defence Weekly, and Jonathan Miller, Senior Fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs. Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.